There are moments in life that completely shatter your reality, but nothing prepares you for hearing your own sister calmly explain that your father is dead while the man himself is sitting right in front of you. My name is Chloe Vance, and that exact phone call turned my entire world upside down. My sister Paige called me out of nowhere on a quiet Tuesday morning. She did not shed a single tear as she stated that our dad had passed away during the night, adding that his entire estate now belonged to her and her husband Greg. I sat frozen at my kitchen table, watching my father quietly reach over to swipe a slice of bacon off my breakfast plate. Greg laughed in the background, boasting that I was officially cut out of the family for good. My dad set his coffee mug down without making a sound, a faint smile touching his face as he listened to every single word. They had no idea that the man they were busy burying over the phone was alive, well, and hearing every cruel word they said. Understanding how my family reached such a terrifying level of deceit requires looking back 9 months earlier to a rainy afternoon. Dad had suffered a terrible fall while clearing leaves from his roof, shattering his right wrist and leaving him unable to manage basic tasks. At the time, I was working long shifts as an agency nurse 3 states away, leaving me unable to move back home immediately. Paige stepped in with overwhelming enthusiasm, insisting that she and Greg would take care of everything until Dad fully recovered. They convinced him to grant Greg temporary authority over his banking so his monthly bills would not fall behind while his hand healed. It seemed like a loving and reasonable gesture at the time, so I trusted them completely and went back to work. I had no reason to suspect that my own blood relatives were already laying the groundwork for a massive betrayal. The dynamic shifted almost instantly after I returned to my nursing job, as reaching my father became virtually impossible. Every time I dialed his cell phone, Paige was the one who answered, offering endless excuses about how Dad was sleeping or resting. When I sent him a brand new phone after Paige claimed his old one had broken, the package somehow vanished before he ever saw it. A second replacement phone disappeared just as mysteriously, and every attempt to speak directly to my father ended in frustration. When I finally came home for the holidays, the vibrant man I knew looked frail, exhausted, and strangely distant. He admitted in a quiet moment that he had not seen a single bank statement in months because Greg had taken total control of his finances. The second I questioned Greg about the money, he flew into a rage and accused me of creating fake drama. The real breaking point arrived a few months later through a frantic telephone call from a former nursing colleague named Sarah. She worked at a assisted living facility 2 hours away and mentioned an elderly resident who kept asking every nurse if they knew a girl named Chloe. My heart sank into my stomach as she read his name off the chart, confirming my worst fears. Paige and Greg had secretly checked my father into a facility without telling a single soul, locking him away from the world. I threw my bags into my car and drove straight to the facility, praying that my father was still okay. When I walked into his room, he looked shockingly thin, but his mind was sharp as a needle. He broke down in tears, admitting he thought I had abandoned him, because Paige told him that I personally authorized his placement there. They had deliberately intercepted my letters, confiscated his phones, and spent months manipulating both of us into believing the other person no longer cared. The head administrator admitted that Dad had never been diagnosed with any memory impairment or physical incapacity, meaning he was legally free to leave whenever he wanted. Within 30 minutes, Dad signed his own discharge paperwork and walked out of those heavy glass doors right beside me. We drove straight to his primary bank the very next morning, and the financial records revealed a nightmare worse than anything we anticipated. Nearly $200,000 had been drained from his accounts over the past half year. Massive wire transfers had been routed directly into Greg's business, while other funds paid for a lavish beachfront condo in Florida. To make matters worse, they had taken out a massive mortgage against Dad's fully paid-off home. We immediately took the financial paper trail to a prominent elder law attorney named Mr. Vance, who instantly froze the fraudulent home loan. He uncovered a forged legal document granting Greg total control, allegedly signed while Dad was heavily sedated during a major medical procedure. The attorney explained that bringing criminal charges would be much easier if Paige and Greg publicly exposed their own fraud by acting on the forged papers. That was when my father devised a brilliant scheme to catch them completely off guard. He reached out to his lifelong friend Arthur, a retired funeral director, who agreed to call Paige with a simple message. Arthur calmly informed Paige that Dad had collapsed and passed away, keeping the details sparse and believable. Paige never even asked how he died, nor did she request to see his body before hanging up. Her only priority was securing his legal documents and changing the deadbolts on his front door within hours. 2 days later, the entire community gathered at the local memorial hall to pay their final respects to a man they deeply cherished. Friends, former coworkers, and neighbors filled every row of folding chairs, murmuring in sadness over Dad's sudden passing. Greg walked confidently up to the podium, holding a stack of legal papers and wearing an insincere expression of grief. He announced to the crowd that Dad had left the house, the savings, and all personal property exclusively to Paige and himself. Greg then cleared his throat and read a harsh sentence, stating that I had been intentionally excluded from the estate entirely. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence because everyone in town knew how close my father and I had always been. Just as Greg reached the end of his prepared speech, the heavy oak doors at the back of the hall swung wide open. My father calmly walked into his own memorial service, wearing his finest charcoal suit and walking with his head held high. The entire room collectively gasped, and several people literally stood up from their seats in pure shock. Paige turned pale as a sheet, looking as though she had encountered a ghost, while Greg stood frozen at the microphone with the forged documents trembling in his hand. Dad walked slowly down the center aisle, stepped up to the podium, and gently adjusted the microphone toward his face. He looked down at the empty display casket, turned to the stunned crowd, and softly declared that dead men do not sign legal papers. Right on cue, our attorney stepped forward and presented the hard evidence to everyone in attendance. He held up medical records proving Dad was unconscious when the documents were supposedly notarized, along with bank records tracing the stolen money. Within moments, 2 uniformed officers entered the back of the hall and walked straight toward the front stage. Greg attempted to explain away the evidence, but his story fell apart completely under the weight of his own forged signatures. Paige broke down sobbing, frantically claiming that they were drowning in crippling debt and only meant to borrow the money temporarily. She then pointed her finger at me, screaming that I was a horrible sister for ruining her life and exposing their financial troubles to the town. In that agonizing moment, I realized my sister felt no genuine remorse for abusing our father or trying to destroy my life. She was only furious that her greedy scheme had failed so spectacularly in front of the people she tried to impress. As the officers led Greg away in handcuffs, Dad stood near the front entrance with an unmistakable sense of peace surrounding him. He looked at Paige with absolute calm and delivered a final line that echoed through the quiet parking lot. He told her quite simply that she had tried to bury the wrong man today. Over the following months, our attorney successfully recovered the majority of Dad's stolen life savings and wiped out the illegal mortgage entirely. Greg lost his professional credentials and served significant time for fraud, while Paige received probation, heavy financial restitution, and hundreds of hours of community service. Dad moved back into his beloved home, where he immediately wound his antique grandfather clock, filling the empty halls with its steady rhythm once again. Every Sunday morning, I cook breakfast at his table, happily watching him steal bacon off my plate just to make me smile.